Big takeaways halfway through the season, plus why Vinny Anthony is one of the key players for the second half for that Badgers offense.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers. I'm your host, Ryan Herring, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Really do appreciate every single person for tuning in, however and wherever you find the show. Thank you so much. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed over at FanDuel.com. Go FanDuel.com to get started. We are bringing on the great Nick Osen from 247 Sports. Covers the Badgers over there. Does great work as always. Nick, man, we're halfway through the year. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was just kind of big picture takeaways, because you and I were there in fall. We saw images of what we thought this team would look like, and it feels like we're starting to get to the point of what we saw earlier and what we expected.
Ryan, man, it's always great, to be back on here with you. I've been looking forward to this, and man, I feel like we could probably do the full show just on this topic. And I say that because we know our stuff, right? We were grateful to be out there. We were seeing these things happen. And it was just early on, it was a little bit rough because, I was reporting on like what I saw. And then when something wouldn't be like perfectly exactly as we wrote about a month ago or so, like it was getting questioned a little bit. And I wasn't used to that, because obviously you have that beautiful type of access. Of course, I'm going to be accurate and use it well. So I think for a multitude of reasons, Ryan, I'm grateful, that things have kind of come into form a little bit as we all expected. I think people got a little too far negatively on one end, not maybe putting in perspective who those losses were to. And now I understand that the schedule is only going to get more difficult at times, right? And we're going to touch a little bit on that one tonight. But you look for things that can be translatable. And I think the top thing, obviously, that's kind of been the center of really the success has been the play on both lines of scrimmage. The offensive line, I think just about all of us expected because of the talent that was there, because of the terrific hiring of A.J. Blazek, so on and so forth. But Ryan, man, I know that there were a lot of questions about the D-line, even coming out of fall camp a little bit. Then we get word of the James Thompson Jr. injury. And, man, that group has fought. And I think somebody's even become a star within that group in Elijah Hills, even if the numbers don't always, jump out. I think that others have really contributed. Ben Barton has graded out pretty well in a couple games, Kurt Neal. And I just feel like, I'll bounce it back to you and I can add a couple more, but just dominating the lines of scrimmage. And that is what we just saw last week against a pretty good football team on their turf with a lot of expectations coming in. And I think that is what we can expect to see from Wisconsin now going forward, whether they win or lose.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, right? Because you had a Rutgers team that they come and they want to run the ball. They have one of the better running backs in the Big Ten. And it's really easy to fall into the trap of, well, strength of Rutgers running the ball, weakness of Wisconsin defending the run. And that wasn't the case at all. That front seven stoned them. And I think Elijah Hills is a budding star. That was definitely not expected. But I kind of want to ask you this. That's just kind of part of the portal soup, right? Like sometimes you just bring in some bodies on the defense line. If you're like, you bring in a couple guys, and sometimes it's just about adding numbers and then developing them with a coach like Whitlow, with a strength and conditioning coach like Brady Collins. Because I think part of this key is those two lines coaches you have now, Blazek and Whitlow. I think that's part of the key because those feel like home run hires, man. And to me, that's one of my big picture takeaways.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I remember when Blazek got hired, I was fortunate to have kind of a previous connection with somebody that worked with Coach Blazek. So, I was able to just ask a little bit, give the readers a note. I'm sure you remember that. And it was incredibly positive. And Whitlow, he's familiar with some of the people within our network. And so I, learned a little bit more about him and kind of his career path. And he's known as a developer for sure. You look at some of the talent that he has gotten to the league or, really helped develop. And I think that is exactly what Wisconsin needed. I'll say specifically on the D-line position, just because, recruiting like great offensive linemen has often been successful here too. Whereas at times it has been a little bit tougher maybe to get a a 4 or 5-star D lineman. But you need a guy that can take a body as a freshman, year and a half, 2, 3 years later, have them at like playing a potential all-conference type level. And I feel like Hills, you're right, maybe wasn't expected quite as much. I know that I was excited for the fan base about the addition, and I got to speak with Elijah a little bit very early on, Ryan. But yeah, I mean, I just have really enjoyed, he just embodies kind of the spirit of Wisconsin football so well too. I remember speaking with him after week 1 or 2, like just all smiles, just taking in every moment. You could see it in the last Wisconsin football video from, I think, Sunday. But, it's been really impressive. And so I think those are a couple major takeaways. And then, of course, you and me, man, we have to mention Tawee Walker. Because we felt that he was not only head and shoulders performing as the best back, but one of the best players on the team. And I put him as one of the fall camp MVPs. And then I think things got off a little bit slower. He was a little bit dinged up. And again, sometimes that happens and things go with the offensive line too. But he showed me a little bit more burst in this last game than I expected. You knew the physicality. You knew he could take hits. But he looked really good. And I think this offense is humming right now, Ryan.
Yeah, and he showed Rutgers a little more burst than they expected too. Like you could tell, like I don't think they saw as much of that. He's really good in the hole, right? Like he'll hit the hole. If he makes that one guy miss and he's very subtle with his movement between the tackles, he can make him miss with just a little bit of a stiff leg, and then he's gone. He's been an incredible addition. And then in the linebacker side, I think my other takeaway is it feels like that group is gelling. And one of the issues I think with the portal potentially is when you bring in 5 guys, even if they're veteran guys and they're talented, man, it takes a minute. You just don't plug those in like Lego pieces and everything's good. It feels like Thomas is playing better. It feels like Chaney's playing better. It feels like Allegro has a role. It feels like Daryl Peterson is coming off one of his better games as a Badger. I feel like that, along with the defense line you referenced, which I think was a great point on your end, I think that's been kind of that key to controlling that rushing attack from opposing offenses.
Yeah, I think specifically I'll hit on 2 names that you said. Jaheim Thomas, I think, has really settled in as kind of what we expected at that inside position. And then Daryl Peterson, I felt like I was looking for consistency at times, for my own self, because I saw him play as one of the best players on defense in spring, I think, and certainly fall camp. So I saw these things, and I think that's really translating. I've loved his leadership, even if he's not maybe talked about as much as a leader as, say, a Jake Chaney or a Hunter Wohler, Riley Mallman at times. Like, I think that Peterson has really just taken a lot of pride in this role, this group, this opportunity. And I think it's gotten a lot better. And I think the linebacker play, I do, the Pro Football Focus grades like after every game. And that group has really coming together. Like you said, I think Coach Tressel deserves a lot of credit, as does Coach Mitchell. I think they've started to find the pieces that really work. And man, I'm not somebody to jump on the hype. This. So I wanted to see more from Allegro this year. Every time he's out there, Ryan, he pops. Like, as our guy Justin would say, like, it looks a little bit different. He is explosive. He's athletic. I think he could potentially be a league guy down the road.
Yeah, I always use the old phrase, if you had never watched football before, who looks like a good player in this random sport? Like, if you landed on planet Earth, I think a lot of people would be like, wow, that Aliagro guy, that I don't really know his name, but he looks really good out there. He's physical, he's fast. Like, what he does kind of jumps off film. Like, some things you have to go back and watch film. You have to rewatch the game to see the nuance of maybe the pin pull offensive line, right? You have to see certain things set up. With Allegro, you can watch it one time through, half drunk, and you can see the plays. Like, you can see him pop, and he brings a level of physicality, but also athleticism. You see him drop back in coverage. He used to be a safety in high school, kind of that hybrid guy. I think he is potentially a leader down the road. Excuse me. I want to talk about a couple players, maybe outside the obvious, the Braden Locks type, that are going to be, in your opinion, key players down the stretch. We're going to get into that next on Locked On Badgers with the great Nick Osen. We're going to take one quick break for our friends of the show, get back to this incredible episode. Today's episode is brought to you by our amazing friends over at Hims. Listen, life is a blender of spontaneous moments. You can be sitting there on the couch, having the IPA, a bowl of Cheetos in front of you, then you watch Kenzel Doe go ahead and house a punt return, or you see Graham Mertz look like Dan Marino in his first action, or you see Slam Sam Decker catch an oop and bring it home. and you want to be ready in those moments. That's what HIMS is here for. HIMS is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. The process is 100% online. There's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. With hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMS helps you find the ED option that works for you. For when those Kenzel Doe, Melvin Gordon magical moments hit, you want to be ready for those. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's hims.com, hims.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options at hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate restrictions do apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on products and subscription plans. Let's get back into this incredible show. I do want to always give out Nick and everybody that comes on the opportunity, man. Talk about where they can find your work on Twitter, where you write. Where can they follow what you're doing?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ryan. I send out just about everything that I do at The Real Nick Osen on Twitter, on X. NICKOSEN at The Real beforehand for the Twitter. And then Badger 247, a part of the great 247 Sports Network. I've got a new segment that I kind of brought back recently that the fans have been enjoying. A couple key recruiting updates coming up. So I'd say definitely worth it, guys.
And I would definitely go ahead and add on. I've been a 247 subscriber for a long time. Nick does great work there. I'm a sub. I go on the boards and I read. So I definitely encourage people for great discussion, great info. Go check out his work over there for sure. Nick, let's talk a couple key players down the stretch. Let's start with offense, and let's maybe try to avoid like Braden Locke. Obviously, Braden Locke continuing to play at a pretty good level is a key player. I'm going to throw my guy. I think Vinny Anthony continuing down the stretch. Sorry, I might have taken yours. I'll let you go first on defense. What he does for this offense, it doesn't necessarily show up in volume of catches, obviously, but he has finally given this team that for years has searched for that deep vertical threat. He's given them a guy who consistently can beat press coverage, who consistently can get past the defense, who's going to force safeties to back up, and he also catches the ball. Like Skylar Bell gave you some of that, but he was inconsistent catching the ball. Vinny Anthony has flashed the hands, the yak ability, and really that dangerous playmaker that forces defense coordinators to keep his safety a little deeper or forces them to back off at the line of scrimmage. I think he's one of those key dudes down the stretch, and he's really emerged this year.
As you saw by my reaction, that was my number one. I'll give a couple here for offense. I think Vinny, not a ton to add there, but just, it's been really cool because I think that you even saw a flash or two last year when he got a little game action. Mm-hmm. And just a phenomenal, kid to speak with. Again, that excited Wisconsin spirit. He's not just, a one-trick speed type of guy. Like, he's a pretty good route runner, actually. You saw that in a couple of his recent touchdowns. Good hands. I think really just brings like kind of a good even leadership to the room, a room that's been very close that he has told me about, CJ's told me about. So he'd be one. It's another fairly obvious one, but I actually have him as one of the MVPs so far this season, Jack Nelson. I think that he has been the player that many of us expected, which I think is a really good thing. And then I will add another wideout, CJ Williams, who's also like really come along. Obviously there have been some injuries in that room. So those are a few guys that if they continue to hit their stride, I think this offense will remain simply humming right now because that is what they're doing.
Let me ask you this, and I didn't prep you for this, I apologize, but it popped in my head when you were talking about some of these guys and some of the unsung contributions of a guy like CJ Williams. Is there an unsung hero on this offense? If you had to say that's the guy who does the most but gets the least publicity?
That's a good question. I think until a couple weeks ago, I maybe would have said Vinny. Otherwise, probably Riley Mallman. I think that he gets talked about by the right people, right? He's getting a lot of NFL buzz. We expected that coming into the year. But you don't necessarily talk about offensive linemen individually a ton by themselves. And, man, whether it's the eye test, whether it's running in his direction, whether it's pass pro, whether it's the grades, like I mentioned, he has been terrific. Like, the tackles have been bookends to one of the best offensive lines probably in the country, certainly in the conference. And so that'd be my guy for offense, Ryan. What about you?
Yeah, I think Mallman's a great one, actually. I would have gone I think you could almost make a case for either tackle. It felt like coming into this year, people were still remembering last year's performance and weighing that a little too heavily in a new offense. And we're underselling both tackles. I think Nowakowski's a guy that's interesting as a guy who does a lot of little things, but really never gets talked about. Like he'll lead on power running plays. Like he'll be in there in a lot of formational stuff. Nowakowski's a big part of this offense without getting a lot of attention for it. What about defensively? I'll let you start this one. What's a key player down the stretch defensively, or a key couple down the stretch defensively that maybe aren't getting talked about?
So this player is talked about often, but I think it'd be a really good answer, especially because of some of the offenses that this group is going to face. And that's Hunter Wohler. You know, I think that he has had a couple, like there's been, 6 games already, man. I think he's had a couple really good games, you know, where we kind of expected. And I think just that consistency on the back end is going to be so important. Like we'll say against a Penn State, because he has the ability to come up and hit, or in Oregon, because obviously, you know, Ohio State's secondary was supposed to be amazing and the talent is there, but Dylan Gabriel and Oregon kind of carved them up. You know, Dylan Raiola can move the ball a little bit. So obviously, I think that he'd be my number one, even though he's a name a lot of people know. The other guy I would say is Hills, because he's been the most consistent D lineman, and that group is also going to have to be terrific, especially against some of these running games that we're going to see too.
Yeah, that's a great one. Hills has just been remarkable. He's been a revelation, man. I'd give you 2 here, and I love both of yours. I think Nazir as that opposite corner Rico against some of these passing games, I think he's really flashed as a run defender. His ability to shed blocks, he's really shut a lot of that action down. He needs to continue holding up as a pass defender. I don't think that's necessarily a question, but it needs to continue happening. And then whoever that outside linebacker is opposite, if Daryl Peterson continues to play, it would be amazing if the John Pius listen, I still think that's possible. Like we could see John Pius continuing to acclimate to this level, get better and better. He still has those physical tools. This team is still kind of missing that bursty edge rusher, right? A little bit. And whether it's Lowry, whether it's Pius, maybe it's a younger guy stepping up. It's almost that other outside linebacker spot that Cheeks might be that guy. That's a great point. Got some reps last week, continued getting more reps. Whoever that is, if they can find a little bit of burst off that edge, I think it changes the complexion of the defense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that was a spot that I was going to bring up as well. We kind of keep going back and forth. That's a really good point, Ryan. And that's something that I think a lot of fans, because I enjoy, you know, reading what our fans say on our boards and kind of their thoughts too. I really do. And that's kind of been a consensus from them. Like as they're seeing, okay, this team is playing really good football. Like we're all the way back in. We're excited to see what's possible. That's kind of been an area that they're looking for. I love what you said a few minutes back on Daryl Peterson. But yeah, Sebastian Cheeks, I mean, when he made that move to outside in fall camp, like I think you were there at that point too. Like he was flashing. I felt like maybe he wasn't always going against the ones, but he was a name that consistently popped up for me in terms of a standout or showing some things in kind of the pass rush game and showing kind of that athleticism off the edge. So I think that those are really good choices. And I feel like, you know, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure what group has impressed more the last 2 weeks, offense or defense, just because they've been nearly perfect in both games.
That's a great point. I don't know either. Like,
yeah,
you've outscored 2 teams 90-something to, what is it, 96-13? I don't have the exact
13.
number.
I think,
94-13.
42 plus 52,
we're doing rough math
right?
here.
94 to 13.
Yeah, it's an A on both sides, right? That's a great point. Both sides have elevated their play, essentially. And here's the thing with football. Football's all complementary. We always talk about that. Special teams complements defense with field position. Defense complements offense by forcing turnovers. Offense complements defense by time of possession. When both sides are playing well, the boat, I'm not going to use boat with Minnesota and whatnot, but the tide lifts when both sides play well because they complement each other. I want to ask you this big picture, and then we'll take a break. But big picture, 2 weeks. I don't want to look ahead of Northwestern, but we know there's a big recruiting weekend coming up. How important is it for Wisconsin to play well in that weekend with some of the guys coming on campus? I think fans always wonder, does it matter if you have this big recruiting weekend, but then you potentially lay an egg? Or conversely, you upset Penn State and the place goes wild. How much does that matter?
Ryan, I love that question. You know, it's one that I've gotten a couple times, and another, you know, kind of Badger pregame thing. I think it's really smart. This is what I would say, man. I mean, I wish I kept track, right, of all the guys I've talked to, but, 400, 500, 600 recruits at least. And with these game visits, let's say Badgers win, right, which I'm sure we'll be talking again before that game. That is very possible to me. That makes a huge statement. However, if it's close or they play well and they're getting to see the beautiful game day campus in Madison, the excited fans, I believe that's Halloween weekend here. So kind of, the excitement building, red carpet of sorts, building the time with coaches, which Wisconsin is terrific at doing. Truly, I always hear that. That can tell you as much. But, people might say it doesn't matter if they win or lose. I agree that a loss certainly isn't going to wipe away the players' thoughts about the university. But I can tell you, man, if they pull off a win like that, players remember that. And they remember the excitement and the locker room speeches and just the celebrating with the players post-game. Those things are all very real. I can certainly tell you that. And another thing is they do look at their position play. So, let's say in a Wisconsin Penn State game, let's say it's a close loss or something. And again, I'm not projecting that, but the linebackers just totally shut down, the intermediate pass game and the run game. Players will latch onto that too. So I think that's pretty important, but most important, relationship building, game day environment, that's all there. And we know that's going to be, we have said for months, there's probably going to be a night game, but now to see it come to fruition, man, you've got to be excited too.
That's going to be incredible. And I'd also just kind of imagine the close game matters, right? Because the jump around it differs dramatically if it's a 42-3 game or a 20-20 game, right? It matters. And that place is jazzed up in a close game or if the Badgers are beating somebody to a pulp. That place is jazzed up.
I would argue, real quick, I know we got a break, but the best jump around in my eyes is if you're just maybe trailing or tied with a really, really good team and you're looking for that extra burst to go into the fourth quarter, maybe Wisconsin's driving, they're near the 50, that jump around is memorable and truly can affect momentum or at least the feel of momentum in those games.
Yeah, 100%. Listen, if that place is 17-17 heading into the fourth, that place is going to be absolutely electric, 100%. All right, we're going to take one more quick break. We're going to come back, a little more recruiting buzz, and then some basketball. Hoops is coming up. Excited to get into it with our guy, Nick Osen. All right, we're going to take one quick break for our great friends of the show, and then we're going to jump back into this conversation. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our incredible friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is awesome. Right now, NFL fans, if you bet $5, you get $200 bonus bets back guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com is incredible. The official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network, the biggest sportsbook out there. They are amazing and awesome. And you know that feeling when you hit a home run bet, that 3-team parlay, that 4-team parlay, maybe it's a 5-teamer and you're sealing the deal with Tawee Walker, reaching over the end zone as you're screaming in the stands, seeing the dollar signs raining from the sky. I don't know that feeling because I don't ever hit parlays, but I'm sure there's people out there that do. And if you're going to hit those parlays, head over to FanDuel.com to do it again. A $5 bet gets you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Spice up your weekend. Do it responsibly as always, but it is the best platform. Parlays, teasers, future spreads. If you were betting on the Badgers, this is the place you have to do it. Again, do it responsibly, but spice up your weekend with the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. That's over at FanDuel.com. All right, let's jump back into this show. All right, welcome back again, Locked On Badgers. We got Nick Osen here. We are talking a little bit more of this recruiting buzz. We got this great question from Wisconsin JPEG. He wants to know, to Nick, man, who are some of the 25s who have taken the biggest leaps this season when you've seen that new film come out?
Wisconsin JPEG, I believe they're on the boards too.
Okay.
Always active. I love that. Really good question, my friend. I've got a few that I would think of. And obviously, I've been fortunate, right? I've gone out to see a lot of these guys, which has been awesome. I haven't gotten to see everybody, of course, but a few names, whether in person or just watching their film, that kind of come to mind here. I think that Jamari Washington, I've seen him with my own eyes, and I think that technique-wise, he's really come a long way. So that's somebody. Xavier Okponu, his senior film, I know fans are excited about that addition. And just the way he's playing, I recently checked out some of his highlights. Looks really good, complete. I think he's a guy that has a potential to play in the first couple of years in Madison. Grant Dean, man, I was really excited about that addition because it's always cool to get, one of several talented Wisconsin guys, right? But the complete nature of his game, speed, athleticism, obviously you see a lot of his flashes on offense, just kind of because he does everything for that Nina team, or a lot of it. We caught up a couple weeks ago. And then Nick Clayton. Now, little credit to our group of friends here, the podcast group. We said that this was a 4-star guy, and I believe he's, getting very close if he's not there in terms of a composite. I expect that to continue to grow. Like, he just seems to be putting it all together, and that was such a good eval. A lot of schools had seen him blow up, but eval, development pitch, relationships, like, he's going to be a guy, Ryan. So those are a few that came to my mind. And, just because we were talking about the Penn State game a little bit, a lot of the commits will be in town for that one. Yep. And, the staff is doing a great job getting many 2026 targets, added a lot of 4-stars to the list recently. Myself, Evan, kind of through the network. And I expect a couple more to be on that list too for that huge Halloween weekend game.
What a great recruiting opportunity, man. And by the way, I love a couple of guys you're listening out there. Today I was just messing around and I put out a list of players who in the 25 class who I think are underranked, right? And Jamari Washington's on my list, right? Xavier Okponu's on my list. Like, some of the guys you're talking about, those guys are just, I love what we've seen from some of the updated film, but just their skill set, the physicality they bring. Jamari Washington is one of the most physical defensive backs you're going to watch in a high school film. Just blows up everything. Nicholas Clayton wasn't on my most underranked list because he just kind of got a bit of a jump, but he's that type of edge wrecker, that kind of game disruptor. This team, every team in college football, you need 2 or 3 of those guys having elite defense. He looks like he could be redshirt freshman type, stepping in and providing that burst. So 100%, absolutely love it. Let's shift to basketball really quick. I'm curious because you've seen the team practice a couple times. You've talked to coaches, you talked to players. Where do you feel like this team is right now, and how I think Badger fans are very reluctant maybe to get really optimistic based on that, how the season ended last year. And then you lost an AJ Storr, you lost to Chucky Hepburn. I think there may be a little too much pessimism when you also remember that was a 5 seed and there's a lot of pieces back. But I'm very curious, where are you at on this team right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ryan. So I've been fortunate. I think we've gotten to 4 practices. I think there's one more open practice, red and white scrimmage before kind of games get going, exhibition games. And I would say a couple things. What's the positive? Bullish? It's like bullish versus bearish. I think
bullish
it's bullish.
Bullish is ready to go.
I'm bullish on this team's depth. I've written it a couple of times. I think I'd legitimately trust 1 through 10, 1 through 11 in Big Ten play. I really do. So I think that's an area I've been impressed with. I think the defensive intensity has also stood out to me. But I've also wanted to make sure, as I learned from fall football camp a little bit, like I mentioned, to still, be honest and make a little bit clear of, an area where that might take a little bit of time or things like that. And I felt very validated. And my guy Ryan mentioned this point with me talking recently too. I felt very validated in Coach Guard's presser this week that, I've got the details on out there that maybe, and these are not his words, but just kind of putting what I've seen with what he wrote. He talked about, how basically the less dribbling, the better. It's kind of like, ball movement, moving through screens, passing. That's a good thing for this team. I agree. A, because that's good offense, especially in college basketball. And B, because I'm not sure, I think I know who the guy or two will be, but shot clock running down the last couple of years, offense stagnant. AJ Storr could generally get a bucket or get fouled. And I think that Chucky hit some of those shots too. This year, I'm curious who that's going to be. I don't think it's going to be an issue because of the ball movement and more of this free-flowing offense with Guard and Kirk Penny and so on. But, I think you'll look to Blackwell. But he won't necessarily, his game isn't necessarily predicated on just breaking you down, though he can drive. So I think that's an area, and just kind of getting these new pieces in. I mean, Guard and the staff would tell you themselves, that's still kind of coming along and developing. But on the same lines, I want to note this core that is returned is really good. Like Blackwell has taken a step. I want to see it in game action to call it the step. But like he's approaching, you know, potential star status in the Big Ten. Max Klesmit, he's been a little bit dinged up here and there, but man, he looks terrific. Steve Crowell, I think, has gotten a little bit stronger, more aggressive. And then John Tonje, man, I'm just excited to see more than anything, maybe how the roles shake out at that 3 or 4 spot, because I feel like Xavier Amos has one of the highest ceilings on the team. But John Tonje's been like Mr. Consistent at practice. I know that you got to see a little bit of that too, you know, when we were there. So sorry, that was kind of a long-winded way to say that I don't think fans should be pessimistic at all. I'm excited about this team, and not just because of my love for college hoops. I think they're going to be fun to watch. And I'm just really intrigued because, man, this Big Ten, it might not have the rankings of some of the Big 12 teams. But if you told me, hey, you gave me 15 different names in this conference, 11 or 12 are going to make the tournament, like, I'd believe you. Because some of those guys, the teams that are even lower, like, okay, Rutgers has 2 future top 5, top 10 picks. Iowa, I think, did a nice job returning their core and, you know, a couple portal moves. And you could continue to go on. Like, Oregon is old, man. They're old and they have good talent. You know, Bamba and some of their guards that are there now. So, like, obviously Brandon Angel at forward. So it's going to be intriguing, man. It's going to be a dogfight in terms of the competition to get there, but I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, and you're not, you know, Purdue always does a good job of reloading. Illinois has talent again. Like Michigan has brought in a lot of.
State returned like 4 out of their top 6 guys.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces out there, no doubt. And I think you hit the nail on the head. One of the things I was struck by is I wrote down a list of 10 people, and I think all 10 of these are going to play. And then that didn't include a Marcus Silver. That didn't include a Jack Janicki who's flashed. Like, this team, I think, is legitimately deep. Let me throw this one out to you as we wrap up here, because we're at about 31 minutes. But I still feel like the biggest question I have is point guard rotation, and more specifically, what does this team do against a really athletic, big defensive backcourt? I kind of wonder if the answer is it's going to be Klesmit or Blackwell handling the ball, and then you're going to have a lineup with Klesmit, Blackwell, Tonje, Amos, and Crowell, and there's just not going to be a point guard. I kind of think that's the best lineup at Great Guard's disposal, quite honestly.
So I'll go that back part first. I think those are probably, at this point in time, maybe the best just sheer basketball players potentially at this point, right? Like, you know what I think of Daniel Freitag's long-term potential. Jack Janicki can play, man, like, truthfully. So he's been impressive. But, you know, how would they handle that? I think Kamari McGee is still getting a little bit underrated. You know, he might not like break you down and go for 13 and 7 dimes or something, but like, he can play. He is trusted by the staff and in this offense. He's tough. He's a decent passer, and he can defend. But in terms of, like, you know, a tall, athletic, like, strong backcourt, like you mentioned, yeah, I think maybe you do roll with like a Blackwell or Klesmit. I know that Guard talked about liking them in transition. And then you just kind of, roll with kind of your best guys, maybe shot creators or scorers, and Tonje, Amos, Crowell. I think that Winter could help in a situation like that too, because he has a little bit of a guard background, and then just kind of provides the length on both ends as well, if you are going maybe a little smaller at guard. But I think it's going to be intriguing. I think that's rightfully the top question. I know that it was asked about at our presser with Coach this week. And, you know, I think we'll get a glimpse Sunday in the red and white, but you'll really, really get a look. What would that be? I believe week and a half later in kind of that first exhibition, Ryan.
Absolutely love it. He is the great Nick Osen joining us. Always appreciate your time, man, when you come on. Go follow him at The Real Nick Osen, or go check out his work at 247. Covers all aspects of this program, football and basketball. So go check him out. Nick, as always, man, really do appreciate you. On Wisconsin, a bunch of content coming up this week, guys. When you're done here, go check out Locked On College Football. All the latest college football news from the Locked On Podcast Network, covering you 24/7 over there on Wisconsin, and we will talk later.